what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of All Accounted For. I'm your host, Sureshni Ryder, and of course, I'm always with Bee. She's from the Faculty of Accounting. First up, can we give you big love? Thank you so much for all the love you've been giving us on social media. You guys are running those streets. I see it on TikTok. We're getting messages on YouTube, all over the show. So thank you so much. We're so glad that you're able to engage with content like this because All Accounted For is all about, we know you need to balance those books, but you also need to balance life. And the best way to learn is a world that shows you real examples. And that is what Bee is bringing to the fore when we do All Accounted For. So the course is really simple, and how we unpack it in these episodes, we break it down into 3 main subheadings. The first one is called Bottom Line Bulletin. We feel it's pretty important to cover the latest in accounting news to bring you up to speed of what's happening in real time. Credit Where It's Due has always been one of my personal favorites because I love profiling and showcasing local heroes, people who are chartered accountants and have managed to navigate the waters and do grand, amazing things. It's pretty damn inspiring. And then finally, Ledger Lowdown, which is a corporate segment where we evaluate an industry and we kind of unpack how it actually works. Because the big things is like, okay, well, how do they make money? And how does it link to us in our studies? And how does the whole thing work and come together? What are the key takeaways? And that is basically the gist of what we call All Accounted For. Strap in, lock in, welcome to it. So we're talking bottom line bulletin. And then like we said, we look at the industry or we look at an article that's really imperative for us to look at and we unpack it. One of the things we're going to discuss is a business tech article that recently came out and spoke about South Africa's middle class that is disappearing. Immediately my head was like, hold on, the middle class seems to have been the belt that kind of kept our economy afloat. According to the article, it highlights the growing debt burden of middle class South Africans. Middle class South Africans have unsustainable levels of debt and are currently spending on average 7,000 Rand per month. And that is based on retail accounts, unsecured credit, and other types such as bonds or vehicle finance. I mean, this is a little bit worrying if you think about it, because if you look at salaries of the average middle class person, 7,000 is a huge chunk to be spending on living on a credit card. But Bea, what are the key points contained in the article that you want to reference today?
Well, so I think the first one being the fact that we can't seem to agree on what exactly middle class means. So what the article was saying is that it's essentially somewhere between a salary or an income of 5,000 Rand to 29,000 Rand. Now that range is actually quite significant, but I think it also speaks to the inequality, wealth disparity issue that we have in South Africa, and that's why the picture kind of looks like that. And then if you also look at the debt levels, which you were touching on earlier, so some banks would actually say that anything above 30% of a debt repayment to income ratio is problematic. And so what the article was saying is that they're actually sitting at a percentage or a ratio is 53%. Now, what is this? It's basically a percentage of a person's income that is then going towards debt repayment. So they're essentially saying about 53% of people's salaries are going towards debt. And then the question then becomes, what type of debt is it? Now, they did say that you do have your unsecured debt. That would be your credit cards, for example, your personal loans. And you also have your secured debt, such as home loans, vehicle asset finance, and such things. Now, the middle class actually is high or has high exposure on both, which is also a bit bad, because now the thing with unsecured debt is that you don't really have anything in return. So you now actually sit at a net liability position, if we can call it that, because all you have is just this debt and nothing to show for it, if I can call it that. And I think the problem also comes from the fact that economically, not just South Africa, but the world is not doing as well in terms of economic growth. So you have all of these salaries that are not rising to the level of inflation or to the level of costs of living. And now that little income or that little disposable income that the middle class have is now being eroded by just the high cost of living. And that's why we find that they're now having to sustain their lifestyles through debt. So, I mean, overall, the picture is very bleak.
Do you think it's a bleak picture for now, or do you think there should be some hope along the way? I like to see the positive in many things.
Hey, I mean, they did say there was one data source that actually said that the middle class has shrunk over the past couple of years. So, for example, in 2017, we had 6.1 million people belonging to the middle class, whereas in 2020, it was now 2.7 million. So that was a
What?
56% reduction in the middle class. And I think that's why the article is saying the middle class is essentially disappearing. And you now have a high percentage of people now falling under what is called an ultra poor individual category, which is basically people that are earning way or below minimum wage. And that number of people has also increased over time.
Interesting food for thought. Thank you so much, B. In All Accounted For, we look at different aspects of the actual course. One of those segments that we profile and we highlight is a trailblazer, somebody who is a captain in the industry, somebody who is also a chartered accountant. And today, that spotlight falls on Mbeko Mbebe. And Mbeko Mbebe's professional journey is just a powerful testament. I love Credit Where It's Due because I love getting to hear the real story and the humble beginnings and how somebody has managed to change their trajectory. So it's a powerful testament, I think, to perseverance and resilience. Born in a small village in the Eastern Cape, South Africa, Mbebe faced significant challenges, including limited educational resources, but he was determined to succeed. His passion for numbers led him to pursue a career in accounting, and despite numerous setbacks, he never gave up on his dream on becoming a chartered accountant. And I think, B, that's been the golden thread of everyone that you have profiled recently on Credit Where It's Due. They've been stumbling blocks, they've been serious hurdles, but that fight, that little indomitable spirit to push forward, that's been there. Tell me about Mbeko's journey and what do we know about Mbeko?
Okay, so Mbeko was raised by a single mother who was a teacher, and so as can be expected, she really did put a lot of focus on just education and really believed in just the value of education. Despite their hardships in matric, he did well and he secured a scholarship to go and study BCom accounting at UCT. Now, what particularly makes Mbeko's story very interesting is that typically it takes you about 7 years to become a chartered accountant. So you'd study for 4 or 5 years, depending on the university that you went to, and then you do your articles for 3 years.
Wait, hold
But
on. It takes you
yes,
7 years to become a chartered accountant.
In fact,
That's you basically a doctor.
7 to 8. Yes.
Get out of. See, I did not know this. Whoa, whoa,
Really?
whoa. Now we are a doctor of numbers.
So you
When
study
did this
for
happen?
4 years or 5 years, depending on which university you come from,
Okay.
and then you do your articles for 3 years.
Oh,
So
so
all
just
in
like a
all, it takes
doctor,
about
you do ComServe and all of that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
so Mbeko studies for you said 7 years and then?
So that's the normal or how long it should take you if you go through the journey with no hiccups, right?
Okay.
Now, Mbeko had quite a lot, and it actually took him 22 years to realize this
Wow.
dream.
But that's
Okay.
22
So
years of hardship and perseverance. That's the way I see it.
absolutely.
Did not give up.
Absolutely.
22 years.
Did
He's a
not
pit
give
bull.
up. Did not give up.
Wow.
So he's actually said that he failed CTA 4 times. He exhausted his CTA attempts and now had to go a year back to do BCTA or third year twice. And then after that, he then passed his CTA, went on to write his first board exam in 2018 after having failed the first attempt, and then went on to write the second board exam, and that he eventually passed in 2023. So I think his journey is just so amazing. And it also speaks to the fact that, you know, if you believe in your potential, you can basically do anything. Your potential is limitless.
Yeah.
Whether there are setbacks along the way, if you're really, really passionate about something, if you really, really want to achieve something, you can just go for it.
That's right. Some of the journey can take you 7 years and some can take you over 20. And the fact that he spent these decades working at it and making sure he was perfect at it, I can imagine how successful he is right now. Congratulations, Mbeko. That's a great story because I think that is testament to perseverance and the fact that somebody had a dream, believed, pushed, and no matter through the setbacks, because that is how his journey unfolded. Congratulations. Oh, I love that one. Mbeko Mbebe, go find out more about him. Go Google, go check out his story. And yeah, that's something that I don't think I'll ever forget. Let's take a look now at private video entertainment. Now, please, before I say private video entertainment, it's not what you see on OnlyFans. I'm sorry, it's not that, okay? It has nothing to do with those kind of streaming platforms, but it's a special focus on MultiChoice, DSTV Mzansi Magic, Showmax Mnet, that's the MultiChoice group, and of course, E-Media Investments, which is ETV and ENCA. So tonight on All Accounted For, let's look at the facts and figures about, let's start off with the multi-choice group B. Just let's unpack revenue, subscribers, etc. Go for it.
Okay, cool. So there in 2023, MultiChoice actually generated revenue of around 59 billion rands. And they have a total of about 20, I know. It's
This
making
is
me
my
feel very
industry.
poor right about
This
now.
is my industry, people. Now I'm like, all this time I was paying my, this is where my premiums are going. Okay, keep
Are you
going.
feeling underpaid?
59.1 billion rand.
Billion.
That's incredible.
Yes.
Incredible.
Yes.
That's about
But
$3.3
they
billion.
actually, yes.
Wow.
That's
I'm
a
doing
lot
the
of
math.
zeros.
I'm doing the
Okay.
accounting, people. Wow, okay.
And they actually have around 22 million subscribers across Africa, with majority of them, or rather 9.2 million of those, being just from South Africa. And the South African operations contribute around 35 billion of that 59 billion figure that we spoke
Wow.
about.
Yeah.
And they also have a streaming platform, what is it called, Showmax, which
Yeah.
then competes with the likes of your Netflix, your Disney Pluses and such. So yeah, they're doing quite well.
Yeah. Before Netflix became a hotbed, Showmax was really the place that we would go to if you wanted to see those shows that you weren't able to see on Mnet or on DSTV. I was one of those people that wanted to have that Showmax platform, and I really enjoyed what they were sourcing. They were sourcing some incredible shows, and then obviously Netflix kind of crept in, and then Netflix just became the bigger player in the market. Although Showmax is pretty strong, they do excellent local reality shows, and I think local production is a local content and local production is phenomenal. And this is how we keep that seed alive when it comes to the arts and theatre. So yeah, good on them. So you're saying that platform has grown so strong and it's competing with the global giants like Netflix.
And if you look at eMedia Investments, they also have their own little streaming platform, which I'd never heard about actually up until I had to research this for this show. But it's called eVOD.
Yes.
It's essentially. Have you seen it before?
So I have a really good friend, Devi Sankri Govender, former Carte Blanche presenter.
Okay.
Her shows, the Devi show
Okay.
specifically, is one of those shows that is played through eVOD, and it's one of those shows that they're trying to encourage other people to watch. So yeah, it's also pretty new to me because I think I'd left South Africa when eVOD was just becoming a thing, and the only reason why I'm familiar with it is because I follow people like her and I want to watch her show, and I realized, oh, that's how you actually access it. So I think they're also trying new things at eMedia Investments.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yes. I think honestly, if you're in this space and you don't have a streaming platform like that, you're getting left behind, right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
it's very popular amongst even young people. No one wants to pay a DSTV subscription, for example, but they would happily pay for Netflix or some sort of streaming platform because that's where they get the videos on demand. I just wanted to say about eMedia as well that the biggest contributor of advertising revenue is actually ETV. And we're going to talk about this a bit later once we talk accounting with regard to how they, or rather once we talk about how they make money actually, with regard to how that kind of works itself into the advertising space.
I know how.
And
I know.
just,
I know how.
Of course you
It's
would.
wrestling.
That's where you come from.
It's Die Hard. They keep showing Die Hard
Okay.
1, 2, 3 to 10. Okay,
And
it's the only
Sarafina on June 16.
Correct.
You know.
And it's wrestling and it's Royal Rumble. And it's of course that voiceover artist. So that's how they're making money. But yes,
Tonight.
This is tonight. But this is an exciting platform to look at. And if you were to make the comparison between, both channels have such great strengths, and in terms of making that revenue, very interesting. eMedia Holdings generating that 2.67 billion in that financial year of 2023. That's big money.
It is, but even though it's much smaller than, say, your MultiChoice, they are essentially MultiChoice's biggest competitor, and we'll figure this out, or rather, we'll talk a bit more about this later on when we speak about the ethics part of it. But I just wanted to say that in terms of the actual wider industry context, streaming is a big thing. So, like I said, if you are in this space and you're not looking at streaming solutions in the foreseeable future, then prepare to get left behind, right?
Absolutely.
But you also have other challenges, for example, such as illegal streaming, piracy, content sharing. And you get even your Netflixes kind of trying to work around that, saying, hey, you can't be watching on this device and that device.
Yeah.
You can't be having, so they're coming up with all of these things
Yeah.
to kind of combat this space.
Yeah, it
And I
happens in our
think also what
household. Yeah, where three of us want to watch something on Netflix and then we're getting a little pop up. No, it's
Yeah,
also
yeah.
remember with the sharing
They're
and
like,
people using
no.
VPNs and people sharing their codes or whatever. So they have to find ways of clamping it down. And I currently work in
Yeah.
the digital streaming side of television. So this is something that I'm understanding even more and more about how to make that revenue. But you're right, you purchase a brand new TV. It isn't just on three channels. There's access to every kind of streaming platform, and it's up to you to decide, okay, do I want Netflix? Yes. And then do I want Paramount? And then do I want Disney Plus? And then, oh, I want Hulu because my Game of Thrones is on Hulu, or sorry, Game of Thrones is on HBO. Or do I need Hulu because it's Handmaid's Tale? Then you start to follow where you find your favorite shows, because it's a game. They're separating all your favorite shows, and then you're like stuck. I really need to watch this, and how do I get it? So it is a fascinating industry.
I actually wanted to say that you get also people that go into these stock fells of these things where I'm like, okay, I'll pay for Disney Plus, and then you can be a tenant on my account, and then I'll be a tenant on your Netflix account. So we're also trying to be creative with how to kind of get content out of them. But sure, it's absolutely amazing.
From the time we started chatting, you've been spitting some big numbers. You're talking numbers in the billions, and I'm like, okay, let me know now, where is my money actually going? So how does the multi-choice group and e-media investments, how do they make money?
So the simple one, or the obvious one, would be subscription fees. So where you now pay MultiChoice, for example, to access their DSTV service, and this would be tiered. So you have your premium, your compact, your family, so all of those kind of options that are there. And then you have advertising revenue. So you get specific shows or specific times that attract viewers, right? And so depending on that, then that would determine how expensive your ad is to place. So if it's a Premier League show or a popular soapy, then the ads that are going to be coming there. So that's how they make money. Then you also have your streaming subscriptions. So that would be your Showmax, your EVOD that we spoke about. And that's where they basically charge you a fee to access all of this content. They might also have a mobile only plan, which is at a reduced price, where it says you can use your cell phone to access that, and then you can't have any tenants, for example, in your account. Then you also have what is called content syndication and licensing. So where they will produce local content, and then they sell it or license it to other broadcasters or platforms. So, for example, where they make The Queen or Generations, then they sell it overseas, or they sell the license overseas, or whatever the case is. And then you also have sponsorship. So other shows, such as, for example, your ENCAs, they might attract corporate sponsorships, which then kind of bring them additional revenue there. And then you also have something called a pay-per-view, which is, how DSTV box office works. So they'll say, look, you can pay us 30 rands or whatever to access this movie that's currently out in the cinema for like a period of 24 hours. So that's something like that. So they would then pay a fee to access some content for a limited period of time. So that's how they make money.
To give you context from the US perspective, currently I want to really watch Wolverine versus Deadpool. Deadpool and Wolverine. It's Wolverine. I think it was $29. It ends with us. The movie with Blake Lively, of course, based on Colleen Hoover's book, was also around the same price. So that's how they pay per view. When you spoke immediately about, when you're able to capitalize on big events, I want you to think of NFL. Think of the halftime show. Think about American football, which is massive. This is I think the backbone when it comes to sports in the US, other than Major League Baseball. And that halftime show, when you've got that fight with the Pepsi halftime show, the amount of advertisers, and I know this because this is, again, something that I work with every day. I know that buy and that placement for the adverts was unbelievable. We're talking 30,000, 50,000, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I think same applies for political right now. We in the US are currently in the political season, which means political parties, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, it's to say it's almost like a stock market because they need to place their ads and into the hotspots of, so everyone's watching football.
Mm.
That is a captive audience. So what you do,
Yeah.
advertising rates are higher in that particular platform and people pay, and that's how
Yeah.
it works. And like I said, streaming subscriptions, sponsorships. If you think about local soccer and the amount of banks that are associated with rugby, with soccer, with cricket, you start thinking about the alcohol brands. Those are advertising opportunities, and it's such an
Mm.
interesting
Mm.
opportunity to understand how
Mm.
revenue is created in this particular industry. Can you tell I'm excited? Ow! We've been talking about streaming subscriptions. We've been talking about the MultiChoice Group and, of course, ETV. How does it link to studies when it comes to IFRS? How does the IFRS standards apply to this industry specifically?
Okay, cool. So I think having also discussed the different revenue streams, IFRS 15 again would play an important role here. I think perhaps one thing that I want to emphasize is that because of the differing kind of income streams, they would then have different performance obligations. So for example, when someone pays in advance a streaming fee, the company would then kind of recognize that revenue over time, as in when you access kind of that platform. But then something like advertising, it would then depend on what the contract kind of says. So is it we must now recognize the revenue once we've played the ad? Or is it based on, for example, consumer engagement? So once you've reached a certain level of engagement, therefore we will consider your obligation within this contract to have been satisfied. So I think those are the kind of things that would guide how advertising revenue would have to be recognized. And then with regard to also licensing revenue, this would also depend on the licensing contract, right? To say, are we going to now recognize this revenue over time if we're giving ongoing access to this content, like over a period of time? Or are we then actually selling or transferring the intellectual property? Because if you're transferring it, then you can just recognize that revenue at that particular point in time. So those are the kind of things that would guide revenue recognition. And I think IFRS 2 would be another one where, because MultiChoice and e-media investments are both listed, they would then have employee share schemes where the employees then participate in.
Oh.
And IFRS 2 share-based payments is a standard that actually deals with this, because it says that you need to then recognize an expense at a fair value of these options or equity that has been granted over the vesting period. So that's an interesting one that we haven't spoken about. Another one that we've spoken about is IAS 38, intangible assets. To now say, for example, if you're creating content, let's say you're now creating your MultiChoice and you're now creating a movie or whatever the case is. If those costs, qualify for recognition within or as per IAS 38, they would then need to bring in that asset to say, fine, we are creating now this movie that we think is going to make us this much money, or going forward. And also with regard to licensing rights, where you do acquire a license to kind of stream something on your platform, you would then show that as an intangible asset in your statement of financial position. But then also triggers IAS 36, which is the standard on impairment, right? To say, fine, you had these high hopes and dreams for this movie that you've now created, and now it gets to the box office or it starts playing whatever, and it's a flop, right? So clearly, however money you thought or whatever economic benefit you thought you're going to retrieve from this is no longer that. You would now have to impair this asset to now demonstrate what the actual fair value of those future economic benefits that you expect to receive would be. Yes. And then you also have IFRS 16. This is where, for example, you have an agreement where you're essentially renting a particular right, if I can call it that, to say that you're going to show this show, whatever, over a period of this much. Then you can say you're essentially renting this thing, and then it would fall into the scope of IFRS 16 in that case. So these are the standards that I wanted to highlight today.
Oh, got it. I almost said, wah, wah, wah. That's so sad. When something fails, man. Wah, wah, wah. Okay, now I get it. I completely understand. I was wondering, like, people invest in local production and you think it's going to be a runaway success, and then the audience doesn't like what you've created. So
Yeah.
those are some serious realities. And I think that's the hard part when local content gets that pinch. That, man, come on. So
Yeah.
please
Or the
support
show
local.
gets cancelled after
Yes.
season 1.
Correct. So you've got to make sure that whatever you get involved in, you need to make it strong, create great content, and let's please support local. As we look at all accounting for, and like I said, we started off with bottom line bulletin and then credit where it's due. We know there are different pillars in accounting that we usually will get to. And one of those large pillars is management accounting, strategy, and finance. As always, let's look at what principles within management accounting, strategy, and finance apply to this specific industry that you've been talking about.
Okay, cool. So if we just think about costing as a concept, right? So the whole idea of like fixed costs and variable costs and just being able to kind of manage those and also managing what your break-even point basically looks like. So if you think about costs such as satellite operations, licensing fees, production equipment, all of those are actually massive costs. And then if you then look at something like a subscription-based model, it's not to say, are we going to recover at least the cost from the price that we're charging, the cost of producing this thing,
Yeah.
from the subscription fee that we're charging? So those are things that the companies have to manage. And if you also look at, for example, how they position themselves in terms of their strategy. So if you look at your Netflix and your Showmaxes, they've kind of positioned themselves to be like low cost services that are affordable, which then attract your price sensitive consumers, which actually ties in nicely to what we spoke about earlier, to say that people's disposable income is being chipped away by the high cost of living. And so now something like Netflix is going to seem like a luxury if it's too expensive.
Yeah.
So you want to be able to kind of access something like that. And then you get for example, your multi-choice, which then might differentiate itself from competitors because they have exclusive rights when it comes to certain sports.
Oh, friend.
So I know people that are like,
Formula One costs us a lot of money.
I would like to cancel DSTV, but I can't because that is the only place where I can watch the Premier League or whatever the case is. Yeah. And then you also have your Mzansi Magic that is kind of focused at a kind of a certain demographic where they're really into like local shows and just kind of creating content for Africa by Africans. So that is absolutely amazing. And then they also obviously need to make sure that they manage cash flow along with any other type of business, so the money that you're now using to create all of this content, are you then able to kind of make sure that something is also coming in on the side so that the business can keep afloat? And I think there was something that I really, really enjoyed when we were actually doing research for this was with regard to the CSR aspect of these, they're making billions of rands. Yeah. And the question then becomes, how are you, what are you doing for society?
Yeah.
Right?
What are you giving back? Yeah.
What is your contribution to society? And then you get other shows that then will say, okay, fine, for society, we are then promoting cultural content or local content. And then others will say, we provide educational content. So I remember when I was in high school, I would watch like Sam Smith on SABC teaching like maths and science and whatever the case is. And something like that is just absolutely amazing because you are directly empowering the communities that actually consume your content. And so that is something that they really do need to think about. So yeah, it also enhances their brand reputation as well because they are known to be for the people, right?
Absolutely.
So, that's it.
Those CSR campaigns are so imperative when it comes to an actual business model. I do know that that's actually part of your mandate to give back to the community in many ways. And I think if you have a mission statement like, yes, we're showcasing all this Premier League, but then let's create soccer clinics to give back, and I think I've seen that, of course, with SABC, I've seen it with MultiChoice, and of course the e-media group, that they do give back to community. And then if you look from a creative perspective, think about if you look at local production, employment on a local level, local cameramen, people working catering within production, people need to be fed, right? If you're working on designers, set designers, camera operators, you're looking at script writers, and then obviously there's going to be people that's saying, hey, we're working all of this, we're not getting paid. So it's a really complicated industry, but a fascinating one that does give back in many ways. They always talk about, I did a a talk not so long ago about going beyond the classroom. Madiba Day,
Okay.
we all go paint a classroom, we all create a veggie garden, and then on that one day, we all go out and do our 67 minutes of social activity, and then it's forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
These are long-term sustainable projects that they try to implement with, the likes of MultiChoice or SABC when they adopt these CSR strategies. The other thing
Yeah.
is that they need to be differentiators, right? I think you also said it in a way. When you look at the equipment, for example, you watch Supersport, you look at the camera and the quality of that 4D and what they're producing. It is high level, it is next level. Or if you look at
Yeah.
Formula One and the in-depth interviews or the coverage or the fact that they can get their presenters to go and speak to somebody who's an actual driver, it costs money
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's what sets them apart from the next competing channel, and that's where your money goes. And if you're a Formula One fan, you will pay that money because you need access and they've got the rights to it. And it's just the way the market works. But yeah, I think it's an industry that you can really learn a lot from. And I think from being an accounting student, there's some wonderful insight that it's not just about the numbers, it's about the impact it makes in the longer run. But with all of that comes the massive responsibility of taxation. And then I'm just trying to understand what then South African tax principles apply to an industry that is growing at this rate like this.
Okay, so if we just think about royalty payments, right, where they do purchase content from international providers.
Yeah.
So what the law basically says there is that if they're paying these royalties to non-resident companies, they're supposed to withhold a certain tax on these royalties of about 15%. So the students would be familiar with something like that. And then you also have your withholding tax on dividends. We did speak about the fact that they are listed. And so when they do kind of give or pay over these dividends to their shareholders, they must also withhold a certain percentage of that. We call that withholding tax on dividends. But I think just one thing that we maybe discussed when we were talking about pharma was the research and development tax deduction, right? To say that
Yes.
if you're now investing in some sort of new knowledge, new technologies, new information like digital broadcasting, streaming platforms, or content delivery methods, you would then also qualify for a deduction under that section, right? To say that I conducted this research and my research would then need to be approved by the Department of Science and Innovation if they do agree that it is actually new knowledge to some extent. Then you could essentially get around 150% of your expenses as a deduction, as qualifying research and development expenditure. And then you also have then an amortization or a depreciation of your actual intellectual property, to then say if you now go and purchase a right, a patent, a software, whatever the case is, you are not going to get that deduction in that same tax year where you kind of paid over the fee. You would then, they would kind of spread it out over a period of time to say instead of you deducting 4 million in 1 year, you maybe get like 1 million rand every year for the next 4 years. So it's still a deduction, but it's just the timing of it gets changed a bit. So yeah, those are the more tax things that I wanted to talk about today.
When we look at auditing and ethics, this is something that I enjoy to understand because this is something that it's a practice. What auditing and ethical issues, apply to this industry? I believe that these two countries obtained an unmodified audit opinion. Let's talk me through that, B. What does that mean?
So they got unmodified audit opinions, and that basically means that whatever their financial statements are showing fairly represents what's actually happening on the ground, right? And this is, we would expect nothing less from a company that is listed on the JC. It means that they have a strong commitment to making sure that the internal controls work properly and just to maintaining stakeholder confidence. Because how would you feel as an investor if the company you're now investing in is they're saying, yeah, no, the things that are happening in the finances and the things that they're saying is happening in the finances is just not adding up, right? So this is a very, very good thing for them. And I think just in terms of the ethical issues that I wanted to talk about, which is something that you can perhaps help us on, is with regard to, for example, censorship and content sensitivity, right? So there's a very fine line there to balance between freedom of expression as well as public responsibility. So something that has to do, like, say, violence or explicit material or just politically sensitive material, to what extent would they then kind of air that versus choosing to then protect the public or to just protect their reputations and things like that. And then you also get stuff like, for example, your consumer privacy. So now Netflix knows your watching habits. They know which shows you like. They know how much you binge on a new show. So they might sell
Hey,
some of
you
that
don't have to call
data.
me watching 24 hours of Korean drama binging, girl. It's an investment in culture. That's what I tell my family.
Exactly.
I
They know
am,
how much you
I
invest in
am,
culture.
I am a
Okay.
K-drama fan, okay? Korean drama and obviously Bollywood, but Korean drama, that's where my algorithms are so messed up that my husband has basically blocked me off every profile. He was like, "You will have your own profile. You will not mess with any," because the moment I entered the room, so does
It's
5,000 other
Korean
K-dramas.
drama.
It is full. He says to me, "Is there nothing else?" I'm like, "No, it's cultural. I'm learning languages. I'm learning about food. Guys, my
Yeah.
noodles, I'm living 2 minute
Yeah.
noodles for once. Wait till you see what I can create with 2 minute noodles." But that's my reasoning. It's not a binge. But you're so right,
So
because we're
now,
being followed. We're being completely followed.
exactly. So now it's to what extent do they use that information?
Yes.
Perhaps, okay, fine, to better your viewer experience is one thing, but to what extent do they use that information to sell
Yeah.
it to advertisers so that you now get targeted advertising? And that's a thing
Yep.
that's kind of been in the news lately about just the ethics of it. The point is that you must at least ask the consumer to say, are you
Yeah.
consenting to us sharing your data or your habits, whatever? And don't just pull wool over people's faces and just sell it to others without having discussed it with them. And also, I think another thing that I found interesting was with regard to deceptive advertising, to say that yes, you may not be creating the advert yourself, as DSTV or ETV or whatever the case is, but what type of adverts are you allowing to then air on my channel, right? So am I now going to say, look, for me, it's money first. As long as I get that advertising revenue, I don't care if whatever it is you're advertising is harmful to children, is
Yeah.
harmful to the community, to vulnerable groups, or whatever the case is. So it's also to say stuff like that. You also then need to balance your social responsibility with regard to advertisements and such things.
Yeah, and I think that also crosses over to mediums like radio. I remember there's an Alcohol Restrictions Act where you can't play adverts that promote alcohol in the hours of, let's say, 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. because kids are waking up, they're going to school, they're in the car, they're at school, they're coming
Yeah.
home, and then you can't encourage smoking or, drinking of alcohol. But you find ways around it. So at 6 p.m., then those shows, for example, if it's going to be a really big soccer show, now you imagine like it's a Robert Morawa hosting a show, and you want,
Yeah.
as an advertiser, he's an outstanding broadcaster, you want to put some cash on that, and maybe it'll be an advertiser that is linked to alcohol as an example, or a big bank. So you have to be very careful of where you put those kind of things, so you see the big impact. And this particular industry looks at all sorts of things when it comes to how people are employed, giving back to local community. There is always a commissioning editor that sits on all of these programs that decides, is this content safe for our consumption? That's why we have ratings. So the
Okay.
shows, for example, if we want to put a show like Game of Thrones, if you've ever seen Game of Thrones, it is extremely violent in certain episodes. It's extremely, nudity, sex, all of that, encouraging, alcohol. It's a very tricky show to just put on any platform to go, here we go, let's take Game of Thrones because it's popular. There's a committee that will sit down and watch that content and go, okay, if we take on the show, we have to be very careful of what time we allow the show to be seen. Now you're streaming, you can watch it at any time that you want. That's why it's an adult show. But if, for example, if it was going to be bought over by an ETV, or let's say Showmax decide, or it's going to play on a normal SABC 1, 2, and 3, though, that's why there is commissioning editors that look at the content. Even when you go to the movie house, the fact that movies are rated, if this is an R rated, if this is mature rated, if this is 18, under 16, PG-13, those are very important to help us figure out what is acceptable for us to watch as adults or as young people. And that's why it all comes together. So yes, this ethics is not just like, okay, we want to sell, we want to make money. There's a great amount of responsibility that goes also behind the scenes. And you spoke about, I think you didn't use the word transparency, but I think that's really what it is when it comes to this particular industry. They are listed on the JSE, so they've got to make sure that their checks and balances are all correct, so that at any point when the public want to ask, why did this happen? Why is this going on? They can say, hey, we're open books. We're absolutely open books. And I think at the same time, they're trying to make sure that they're ethically doing the right thing. They're making sure they're, legally on the right track. They're paying their taxes, making sure that everything that they're engaging with is correct. And then people make mistakes. Things happen. Boo-boos happen along the way. Is there anything that stood out for you in terms from an ethical boo-boo story that you want to share with us?
So with regard to MultiChoice and eMedia, they haven't been the best of friends, but we did say that they are essentially, eMedia is essentially MultiChoice's biggest competition, right? So MultiChoice in particular was accused of monopolistic behavior in sports broadcasting in particular, right? And eMedia filed multiple complaints saying that, MultiChoice is using their dominant position to basically block other broadcasters from providing such services, which then kind of limits the consumer choice. And eMedia, in return, they've also faced some scrutiny, particularly for their aggressive stance with regard to MultiChoice, right? With MultiChoice saying, for example, eMedia is free riding on the sub-licensing agreement for rugby as well as other events. So they're essentially saying that eMedia is wanting to benefit without necessarily making a fair contribution or a fair commercial contribution to all of these licenses or all of these rights that they've had to purchase. So yeah, both companies have been involved in some disputes, but I think, it does kind of highlight something very important, the fact that as consumers, we do have a right to choose where to access our content and to also be able to access that content to begin with.
Yeah. Oh, this is amazing. I remember that actual story being in the media and how it's actually a constant little fight. Somebody's got the rights to something. Oh, how come? It's a bun fight, okay? That's what it is. Everybody wants a piece of the pie. And here we are sitting quietly with popcorn. I'm like, okay, bring me the K-drama. Whoever brings me the show, I'm going to go there. You have my heart and you have my full commitment as part of my cultural development. Bee, thank you so much. This has just been such an insightful and engaging chat with you, especially with this particular industry. It's something that I'm passionate about, but I think it actually affects every one of us. This has become our daily life. Streaming, being innovative, moving towards the fourth industrial revolution when it comes to media and technology and innovation. It's been absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for being part of All Accounted For. B, we'll be catching up with so many new industries in the next couple of weeks. So please make sure you find us on the socials. Say how's it, pop us a question if you have any, and share your insights. We're all over. All, of course, proudly brought to you by Boston Media Broadcasts. Cheers.